Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the latest Downtown Den event, and we're delighted to be joined by Olympian Goldie Sayers, one of Britain's most successful athletes during her time in the sport. And we're going to talk to Goldie about her career, but also her thoughts in terms of what sport will look like post-COVID-19. And many other things besides. And Goldie, lovely to have you with us this morning. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Morning, Frank. Good to virtually see you.
Yeah. And of course, one of the things that we're always keen to draw out of these discussions with champions, which of course you are, is that mindset and that psychology that drives people to success. Because we often say that in business, unless you've got that determination and commitment and the same sort of attributes that you will often find in successful sports people, then actually you're not going to go particularly far. And the drive and commitment that you need from a very early age, actually, in terms of the sport that you were involved in, it is incredible, and not many people get to the heights that you got to in your particular sport. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, let's take you back to your teens, which is when you started to really take sport seriously, and how you managed when, most people of your age would have been going out and exploring different activities, if I can put it that way. To discipline yourself to the point where you did, to get to the level that you did.
I think, to be honest, I did a lot of different sports, so I didn't specialise until I was 18. So I wasn't, as some kids are now, kind of shoehorned into one sport and then dedicating everything and foregoing social life and everything. So actually I did have quite a balanced kind of teenage years, and then decided to specialise at 18. So I was kind of a generalist, really. And I think playing netball, hockey, tennis, all those sports and team sport primarily helped in athletics, because in throwing a javelin you need to be coordinated, have good balance, awareness, and all the things that team sports give you. So I think one of the reasons that I had a longer career was because I didn't specialise too young, and that makes you a bit more motivated to focus on that one thing. So I did have a relatively normal childhood. I was just playing a lot of sport, but I loved it, so I didn't think of it as a sacrifice.
Yeah. And what made you decide in the end that the javelin was going to be the sport that you would focus on?
I was progressing quite quickly and had a good coach. I enjoyed it. I was just lucky in that a good coach happened to be roughly within my area. And I think I struggled a little bit in hockey and netball trials because I had a brown hair and a ponytail and looked like everyone else. So I didn't sort of stand out so much, or I just wasn't good enough. So yeah, I just progressed a lot. And I think possibly an individual sport suited me in that, that you kind of have to rely on yourself, and you're very accountable, and you've either done a distance or you haven't, and there's no politics around selection, or you can effectively select yourself because you have to throw a certain distance to make a team or Olympics or whatever it is. So that kind of suited me a lot, I think, as well.
And then in terms of, you decide you're going to focus on that sport, what was your initial ambition? Did you wake up one day and think, I want to represent Great Britain in the Olympics? Or were your initial goals far smaller than that?
Yeah, I think I remember watching the Barcelona Olympics when I would have been, 10, and thinking, wow, I'd love to compete for Great Britain at sport. And at that stage, I was playing every team sport. And I actually used to watch athletics and think, there is no way on God's earth that I will be competing for Great Britain in athletics, because everyone looks like a complete freak show and so far removed from school sports day. But then obviously I was handed a javelin. I could always throw a ball a long way and just fell in love with it. And then I think when you start, you want to go to the English Schools Championships. Then I won that, and then had my first England Schools International. Then you want a GB Junior International, and so each time you kind of set yourself a goal, or it's mainly a distance goal really, and a process goal that achieves the best or whatever. Then, at age 18, I kind of realised, I've got quite a good chance of going to the next Olympics. I'd only missed out on the Sydney Olympics by a couple of metres. So I kind of knew that I could go to an Olympics, and that's when I started to really kind of hone in on that. But I dreamt of competing for my country, but I don't know whether I ever dreamt of actually winning an Olympic medal or something until it became a reasonable goal to kind of strive for. For me, it was more about mastery actually than it was about anything else. I just wanted to see how good I could be at something. And I feel at the end of my career, I at least tried everything and put everything into it. So I knew I got as much as I could out of it, really.
You mentioned that there was a local coach that really helped you decide that javelin was going to be the sport for you. Was that the coach who took you through the early stages of your career, or were there other people that then you started to connect with? Because I think it's important, isn't it, to surround yourself with the right people whenever you want to achieve great things.
Yeah. So I obviously started at school. I was given a javelin to take home over the school Easter holidays, which wouldn't happen now for health and safety. And he actually just happened to be passing by a clubhouse at a local, I think it was a county schools competition, and my PE teacher just made him come and watch one throw, and then invited me to train at the club, which I did, and then made a huge improvement. So I'm sure if I hadn't have met him, then I would have plateaued a lot earlier and probably dropped out or something, because it is a technical event and you do need, coaching. And it's the same in any industry. I mean, now in my business, I employ a coach or two coaches, because you don't know what you don't know, and it stops you making potential mistakes. And I'm a massive believer in having the right people around you. I mean, certainly in sport, if you want to be in the best in the world, then you need, the best coaches you can find, and best sort of therapists and nutritionists and the whole team. So I'm a big believer in having the right people.
And just before we get on to what I think is one of the best Olympic stories that I've ever been told, I just want to talk about those early successes, because again, it's very easy, isn't it, to jump to, okay, I was throwing the javelin and then I end up in the Olympics. I mean, what I looked at in terms of your career was just how much you smashed the whole British game. You were absolutely top of the tree consistently. So to get to that level, to be the best of the best in Great Britain, it is some achievement. And as you're going through that journey, what are the sort of disciplines that you required? Because listen, as I say, the Olympics, absolutely fabulous. But I'm sure most people in the country would just be happy to say, well, you will be the best in Great Britain at whatever given thing you choose to be. You did that, and you did it consistently for many years. So what was it that just kept you going? And tell us a little bit about how that journey progresses.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just consistent sort of baby steps, and each day just doing everything to the best of your ability. When you put all those days together over the course of the year, you can have made massive progress. I think having the willingness to learn is a big thing, and being aware that you don't know everything and that you need challenging and having the right people around you. When I was younger, I obviously didn't train that hard, but obviously, by the time I was 18, 20, it would be 12 sessions a week, 49 weeks a year. So I always do the calculation, but you've effectively done about 1,700 hours of training over a year. Then if you put that into an Olympic cycle, it's about 7,000 hours of training. Each throw in an Olympic stadium lasts about 4.5 seconds, and you get 3 attempts basically. And if you have a bad day, you can effectively have done 7,000 hours of training for 13.5 seconds. performance. So you do have to be a bit mad as well. I think we kind of overlook that sometimes. You really do just have to have the sort of desire and, motivation to want to do it. But I think in sport, the highs are so high that, even if you have 3 years that are terrible, but you have one sort of Olympic success, it keeps you going for another 4 years. But I think, I coach a lot of people now, and I think, the ability to set goals and actually go through that process is really important. And I don't think people talk enough about how to set goals and how to actually achieve them. People know they need goals, but then actually how to get to the end product is something that people struggle with, and it does take time. I mean, it took me 8 years from picking up a javelin to going to my first Olympics, which, is quite a long time. And I didn't throw my best till I was 30. So, that was probably 17 years or so. So you do have to love it. I mean, that's inevitable. So you're very unlikely to succeed in something you don't enjoy at least, 80% of. And it is just hard work, effectively, that there is no escaping that. There's no sort of overnight sensations. And I think certainly in sport, people talk about talent all the time, but, I trained with so many people who were wildly talented, but didn't have the kind of the ability to stick with something for long enough or make difficult decisions. I think that's a big part of it as well, knowing when you need to find someone else to coach you or have someone else come into the team, or, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think there's a whole host of factors, but I think having passion for what you do is number one, certainly.
And again, so many synergies with business there,
Yeah.
because again, you have to freshen your team up. You have to have those goals in place. And as you say, you have to love and enjoy what you do. Otherwise, likelihood is you're not going to be successful. Let me take you back then to the first major success that you had, and what that felt like. So you're doing all these hours of training. You're obviously setting yourself particular goals at particular times, but there must have been one thing where you've thought, yeah, this is the breakthrough. So it may not have been the very first victory or event win, but where you've actually thought to yourself, yeah, I've cracked it now. I can get to those Olympic Games.
I think, my first English schools win was quite a big deal because I didn't know anything about it, and I threw quite a long way. But I think the most significant performance was probably actually still my best performance throughout my career was, I think, my first British Junior International. It was just at Loughborough, actually, and I think we competed against the best British seniors and then the home countries and British students, and we were the sort of British junior team. I threw 51.92, and as throws go, it was, a fairly as close to perfect throw at that time. And that suddenly meant that I qualified for World Junior Championships, but I was only 15. So that was like an under 20 competition. And so it was quite a significant performance. And I just remember I had my GCSE English exam the next day and I just couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate. So I did quite badly in that. But that was probably the most significant early sort of breakthrough, as it were.
Yeah. So let's fast forward then. Tell us about these first Olympics, and tell us about the build up to that, and what being part of Team GB feels like. And actually, it is, although yours is a very individualistic sport, is there a feeling when you get involved in the Olympic Games as part of that Team GB that it is a team effort? Or do you still very much feel as though, well, no, my event's my event and I'm on my own here?
No, it's very much a team. So you're part of, obviously, the British athletics team. And then certainly I did 3 Olympic Games, and certainly around London or just before that, we did a lot of work around one Team GB, in that, you're so many different sports teams coming together as one team. And there is power in having a team. So, we all made sure we subscribed to the same sort of values, and made sure we were all the same kit on the same day, which is a little thing, but en masse around an Olympic Village, it's quite intimidating. And, you know, even in the Olympic dining halls, the size of about 2 football pitches at least. So just to be able to spot your fellow teammates, because everyone's got the same similar kit if it's sponsored by Adidas or whatever it is. So, yeah, there is sort of great, I think, power in the team. My first games were Athens, and, you know, I was 21, and it's, you know, it's an incredible experience. I think getting the kit is always one of the biggest kind of highlights of any athlete's career, and they make a really big thing about that now. But yeah, just being on the same team as some of your heroes and experiencing something that really is quite unique. I've always had the habit of sharing with Olympic gold medalists, so I was in Kelly Holmes' apartment in Athens, so I saw her whole winning of, you know, 2 Olympic gold medals, and it's those kind of moments that are quite special. So yeah, it's just an incredibly proud, special moment. The only, I guess the only downside of being an athlete in a way is that it becomes normal to go to an Olympic Games, be in teams with these great athletes. And it is quite normal, but it absolutely, you know, actually, and certainly when you retire, you know that it's not normal, but it's whatever industry you're in, that becomes your new normal. So you don't think you take it for granted, but at the time I think you do, just because you don't know any different. So I think actually coronavirus for athletes could be a good thing, in terms of, I always think that an athlete needs a year out just to really appreciate what they do. And so occasionally that will come with injury, but with this, it's effectively going to be a year out of competing that's enforced, which then should make people really appreciate, you know, competing and training next year. I don't know, that's my theory anyway.
An interesting point, and we'll come back to that actually later on. So what were your first Olympics then? Where are we?
So that was Athens in 2004. And then I performed quite well. I think it was the second best I'd ever thrown, but I just missed out on the final by a few centimetres, because at that level everyone's sort of at similar kind of levels. And then went on to Beijing, which was my sort of most successful Olympic Games. And then London, I think, would have been, but I managed to tear an elbow ligament 3 weeks before. So that ended up being a bit of a nightmare, but a sort of lovely nightmare if you can have such a thing.
Yeah. So let's talk about Beijing then. As you say, your most successful Olympics. But of course, you didn't get that special moment of standing on the podium, despite the fact that you were an Olympic medal winner. And as I said at the outset, this is one of the best stories I've heard. Sad in some ways, but of course, in other respects, at least justice was eventually done. So tell us the tale, Goldie.
So yeah, the Beijing Olympics, I threw 65.75, which was a British record, a personal best, but also the furthest ever thrown in Olympic history by somebody not winning a medal. So I finished in 4th place, 38 centimetres off an actual medal on the day. But then, because of effectively all the Russian doping scandal, a girl who finished in silver medal position, was her sample, I think, was retrospectively tested and found to have basically had a steroid in it. So she was stripped of her medal, but she appealed. So it took years and years. So that was 8 years on. I found out that there was a, you know, negative result with a Russian athlete, but then she appealed that decision. So, but I found out, I think in 2016, I was still trying to compete, but it was the last year of my career, and you know, you're desperately clinging on to some semblance of what you used to be. But I kind of knew it was going to be a struggle to compete at my 4th Games. And I was driving, I'd been on a training camp in the States, I'd just come home, and I said to my mum, I'll meet you at, you know, in Newmarket where I grew up, I'll meet you at Waitrose, we can have a coffee, and then I'll go on to training. And as I was driving down the M11, I got a phone call to say that a Russian athlete who finished ahead of me had failed retrospective doping tests, so I'd be upgraded from fourth place to Olympic bronze. So effectively I won a medal driving down the M11, and celebrated said medal with a coffee and Waitrose. So it was certainly memorable. And then what was nice was that I was then going to go on and do a throwing session with my first two coaches. So the first three people who found out were the most significant in my sort of certainly early journey. So yeah, but when I tell that story, I didn't have my Waitrose card, so it wasn't even a free coffee. So yeah. But
and they didn't set a little podium up for you in Waitrose so that you could...
No, I didn't. I don't think I told the story. It would have sounded a bit odd. And then it was, so that was 2016. And then I actually had it awarded at the anniversary games, so in the Olympic Stadium in London last summer. So that was how long it took for the, legal process. And you have to hand your certificate back. It's very funny. So you get a certificate at the Olympics. The top 8, I think. So I had to send my 4th place certificate back before you can get your Olympic medal. And it's all, there's bureaucracy. Yeah.
So, I mean, that, as I say, it's a great little story and anecdote. But equally, when you've thrown personal best, great British record, and you're literally centimetres away from a medal, which is what you thought at the time in Beijing. Did you come away from that games feeling positive, or was there something within you that thought, if only, if I'd have done something a little differently? What were your emotions at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of, we had our suspicions. I mean, we sort of knew it was the stage where you kind of knew Russian athletes were cheating, but you didn't have any evidence, and you couldn't really say anything because there was no evidence, and you're not there to police your own sport. So I kind of knew that I should have won a medal. So it was quite difficult motivationally kind of going again. But then we had 2012 to look forward to, so that helped. But the following year, I did actually have an injury, and I'm sure it was kind of quite emotionally driven in a way. So it was quite difficult to sort of pick myself up and go again, because there was this feeling of, what more do I need to do? Every other Olympics I would have medalled. I think in Rio it was enough to win. So it was frustrating. It's a funny thing, isn't it? Success, like you can perform out of your skin and come forth, or you can have an average day and win. There's a lot of people who've done that at the Olympics. It just really depends what everyone else does, and that's the one thing you can't control. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting story. But I'm looking, I can see the medal there. I've got like a stag in the kitchen, and I don't know, it's hung round this stag's neck above the bin. It's kind of, I just thought I better have it out, the medal, because I thought I'd be really attached to it, but actually it's not, you're not actually attached to the tangible thing. Like it sort of is there was like a fun run medal around that before that. So yeah, and it just goes to show that it's the process that you're most grateful for. I've got huge gratitude for my career, and I could be really, bitter and angry about it, and there's an element of that, but there's nothing you can do. And yeah, it's you're just grateful for the people you met and the lessons you learned and all the behaviors and attitudes and that sort of thing that you can take into other things.
And you've also mentioned that, of course, the 2012 games were on the horizon then, because 4 years in the world of an athlete goes by in the flick of an eye, doesn't it? And,
yeah,
and of course that would have given you a tremendous amount of focus, because of course it's in London, and so at that point that is a big deal. It was for everybody concerned. I just want to get in briefly to the politics of that games, because I mean, again, it's easy now, isn't it, to look back at that time and say, oh, wasn't it a wonderful Olympic Games, and we all had a great time and celebrated the fact that we could put on such a great show. But remember when it was announced that we were actually going to bid for them, there was an awful lot of criticism, wasn't there, about the fact that we were going to be spending all this money on an Olympic Games, and there's people living in poverty, and there's this and there's this and there's this. And I think what it demonstrated to me And as somebody who'd seen the Commonwealth Games in Manchester and then something that was called the European Capital of Culture in Liverpool, you know, I appreciate that these things can actually act as a catalyst for so much good. But it was, you know, at the time, a brave decision, wasn't it, from the politicians who were involved, and then, of course, the executives from, you know, British, the Olympic Committee. I'm not sure what we call it in the UK. There's an athletics board, and we'll come on to the politics of that as well. But, you know, it was a brave decision, as I say, and turned out to be a risk that was well worth taking. So the 2012 games, as I say, Goldie, big deal for you. And then you do masses and masses of preparation for that. So I don't want this to turn into, you know, I don't want you crying at the end of this. But nonetheless, you were so near yet so far in the end with that, weren't you?
Yeah, I think so after Beijing, it was quite an injury-prone Olympic cycle for me, just through accidents of I fell off a box and needed knee surgery, training, not dancing, and it really hurt my hip. I've got a watch beeping somewhere, and I basically had been throwing quite a long way. I was consistently in the top probably 5 at Diamond League meetings, which are the sort of top tier meetings, and then we had the last Diamond League in London 3 weeks prior to the London Olympics in 2012, and everyone who was going to be competing for medals was going to be there. And I actually threw the furthest I'd ever thrown, another personal best British record in the first round, and literally kept on throwing pretty much as far in quite bad conditions. I was beating the world record holder by 2 meters, and I just felt like I'd kind of got it nailed and really technically had found a tiny thing that was making quite a big difference, and just my rhythm was good, speed was good, everything was brilliant. And I just went over to my coach and said, right, I'll take one more throw. I didn't normally pull out of competitions early, but I kind of knew that I'd won it. And in that one more throw, I just threw slightly out the side of my shoulder, put a bit more stress on my elbow, which I've done millions of times, but I was exerting quite a lot of force and managed to partially tear my ulnar collateral ligament, the ligament on the inside of your elbow, which obviously isn't ideal when you're trying to throw a javelin 30 meters per second. So that was 3 weeks prior to the Olympics. It was a partial tear, so there was a chance that I could compete, and I did everything I could to get fit, and I could train everything and do everything apart from throwing a javelin. It was just excruciating. But we did a fitness test 3 days prior to the Olympics, and I was fine. I just didn't throw it sort of 100%. I was about 85 and actually felt fine. So then tried to compete in qualifying, and basically the first round I threw with more intensity, and the partial tear became a full-blown rupture. So, but what's strange when you're so focused, you don't feel pain at all. So I didn't realise that I had nothing connecting my upper and lower arm. I tried to throw twice, but it was a bit like one of those dreams where you're trying to run and you can't. So yeah, it was a bit of a nightmare, but as a, you know, spectacle, and, you know, being able to watch teammates and training partners kind of become household names and things like that was amazing. And it was, you know, an incredible games, and I think worth every penny. If you speak to anyone now, you know, they were a bit like, you know, it would be great to go back to that again. I just think we organised it so well in terms of making sure businesses in London, you know, work from home, and everything was in place. And from an athlete perspective, it was great. I think spectators thought it was great. And I just think we did a great job. So in my opinion, worth every penny. And what's nice is that we have used venues, and I actually was in the Olympic Village not that long ago, and you know, that's all housing now. Stratford's completely kind of, you know, it's revolutionised that area really. So I don't think we didn't get too much wrong, I think, on that front.
No, it was a tremendous couple of weeks, wasn't it? And the whole country, I think, did get a boost from it. Apologies to anyone who's eating the breakfast, as Goldie described her injury at that.
That really put you off your feet. It's disgusting. I've got a photo of the surgery. So. Yeah.
Now, listen, it would be very easy for somebody to go through those experiences that you went through. So being quite literally robbed of a bronze medal in Beijing, then throwing the best they've ever thrown and not being able to demonstrate that on the biggest stage, and in your own country as well, amongst what is arguably the best Great British team that we've ever assembled. I mean, what a fantastic array of talent that we were able to present at that games. And I'm sure, listen, as much as we say the organisation of the games was fantastic, and of course it was, ultimately this is all about the people who are out there performing on the country's behalf. And as much as I say, I think it was a great organisation and it was a fabulous games, I think the success just added another 50% to it, didn't it? If we wouldn't have won all those medals, I don't think we would have felt quite as good about ourselves. And I think that then
what people forget at those games is it actually took quite a long time for us to win our first medal. So in the team, there was a slight level of panic that we weren't going to win or be successful. And obviously that's, first and foremost. But yeah, we ended up, it was the most successful games up to that point, and then obviously Rio kind of topped it, which wasn't actually expected. So yeah. Definitely a few more Olympic medalists than we used to get, certainly.
Yeah, and just very quickly sticking with those Olympics, because we did win the host bid. Do you think that then enabled the sport to attract and demand more funding from government and other sources? Was there then a notable shift in terms of support for athletics, or had that something already been happening beforehand?
No, it was already happening, which is why we were so successful. If lottery funding came in '96, when we came back from the Atlanta Olympics with only 2 medals in total, compared to the 63 medals in London, I think it was. So that funding just enabled, coaches to be paid, like the infrastructure to be there, medical, physio support, all the support services that you need to have to be the best you can be. So it was all in place. I think it's not necessarily changed since. It's just, we are very well funded, but I think people enjoy the Olympics and do get a lot out of it. And I think it's a great way to spend money, although it is the lottery funding is there for winning medals, most of it, and that obviously we need the grassroots funding as well, which is there too. I think sport is actually very well funded. It's just obviously how those funds get utilised that can be good or not so good, according to who you speak to.
Yeah. And so, as I say, I'm going to go back to this mindset thing now, Goldie, because as I say, those sort of knocks and disappointments would have left an awful lot of people on the floor, thinking, life just isn't fair. And, it doesn't matter how hard I try, what I do in terms of training and commitment, there's always something out there that's just not allowing me to meet my full potential. But of course, that's not Goldie Sayers. What you then decide to do is recognise the fact that the career is starting to come to an end. And as you say, you continue for as long as you possibly could. But then, of course, you've started to move into other areas of your life. And our sponsors today are VSI Executive Education. I know you've done a lot of work with those guys as well. But just tell us your journey since retiring from sport and the array of things that you've managed to involve yourself in since.
Yeah, it's always an interesting time retiring from sport because it's such a big part of your identity. And I think that's where a lot of athletes go wrong, is their athlete identity is so high that they then struggle to find another identity because they don't have any other areas of interest, or haven't had like a dual career or whatever. I mean, I always studied during my athletics career, and tried to have as much balance as I could. I mean, I still was very much first and foremost an athlete. So when I initially retired, I just tried lots of different things. kind of did an internship in a, sort of occupational psychology firm, thinking that would be wildly interesting, and realised it had its place, but not wildly interesting. I then knew I couldn't sit at a desk because I just physically can't sit down for hours on end. I've always been interested in physio, and I did a massage qualification. I did some personal training just to kind of keep in contact with stuff that I know a lot about and could help people with. But I'd always, I'd moved several times for training, and I'd read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad when I was about 21, and so understood kind of leverage and investing in like income producing assets. So I had a bit of a residual income when I retired from rental property, from moving from Loughborough to Cambridge to London, and had never sold the house. I'd always, remortgaged them and moved. So I kind of thought, why don't I learn how to do this properly? So then, since I've got quite heavily involved in property investment and have, built, quite a nice portfolio and business around that, I do some social housing, some just private buy-to-let stuff. And, it's lovely to be able to, we have so many houses in this country that are empty and derelict, and I think if we brought all those back into use, then the housing crisis wouldn't be so prevalent. So that's what I try to do. Effectively, my business is buy ugly houses, do them up, rent them out. I mean, it's as simple as that, really, but there's a bit more to it. But I spent some time really kind of understanding the business. I've got mentors and coaches who I can bounce ideas off and help me. And yeah, I love it. And I just love being able to give people nice places to live and, help people. I do a lot of work with a homeless charity, asylum seeker, housing. And so lots of different things. And I've got some cracking tenants who are lovely. And yeah, I love it. So, yeah.
And again, it goes back to that point you made earlier. You've got to really enjoy what you do and love what you do to make it successful. What was the motivation to, at a relatively late age, go back into education? Because that's what the VSI course is. Were there particular things that you wanted to take from that course? Did you go into that with a particular goal in mind? Because obviously that does start to link, doesn't it? The educational side of things, that sports mindset, and what you can potentially do with those things combined.
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, I really love sport, and I've sat on some boards in the past, and I thought, do I want to get involved with the kind of governing body side of sport? And I may yet do that. So it was a sporting directorship masters, and I'm quite keen on sort of culture and organisational leadership, because I just think it just has such a huge impact on performance on the pitch or track or whatever it is. So yeah, I did that masters and met some great people. I'm just at the moment really enjoying building my business, but I still do have quite a lot of involvement in sport. I was on the British Olympic Association Athlete Commission for a long time, and the same for athletics. So I'm a trustee of a charity that helps kind of young athletes, and so for me I like learning. That's why I do lots of different things. So that was the primary objective of it. It wasn't necessarily to use it for anything in the short term, but it might be something that I use long term. But I draw on, some of the stuff I learn quite regularly. I do quite a lot of coaching, exec coaching with an energy company as well. So yeah, I like learning. So that's sort of first and foremost.
Yeah. And just in terms of where we find ourselves at the moment, both in terms of your own current business, but also in terms of sport. So this COVID-19 challenge is something nobody could have envisaged, and it's clearly a challenge for all of us in business. But the business of sport is being massively affected, including, of course, the cancellation of an Olympics So, you will be feeling for some of those athletes who you'll know are going through a really difficult time. And there'll be athletes, won't there, of a certain age who will have said, this is great news for us because, if you're 17, 18, 19, it probably gives you a chance of being catapulted into a position where you didn't anticipate you were going to be. But equally, if you're somebody who's coming towards the twilight of the career, it would be bloody catastrophic.
Yeah.
So that was a bad, that was a bad or a good decision, depending on which way you look at it. Your take was interesting. Giving athletes a year out might actually be a good thing. But then again, there's all the financial implications of sporting cancellations, isn't there? Because, more than any other industry sector, I guess, sport relies on those ticket sales, people coming through the turnstiles to watch people compete. Where do you think sport could be by the end of all this? Do you think it will come back stronger, or do you think there's some adaptations that are going to have to be made?
I think there'll have to be sort of short-term adaptations, and I think there's going to have to be some clever things done with TV. And I think it's interesting how much people or sports fans have missed watching live sport, which is why the Belarusian Football League has done quite well, which people never would have watched before. I think, I think things like cricket potentially, there is a level of social distancing. It's just how you get crowds back into games and when that can happen. But, the only reason we all earn money or, is to spend it on cultural activities, so sport, music, the arts. And those are the things that are the things that make life great. So I think we do need to find some way of reintroducing them. How that happens, I'm not sure. But, having nobody in the stadium initially might be the thing, or a scaled down version of the sport. You could have one event, say in athletics, and televise that. There's been some of that happening online, so pole vault competitions between a few athletes in the world who have pole vault beds like at home in their gardens randomly. So I think we just need to get a little bit cleverer about it. But I think it has to return at some point, but it's just how long this goes on for, whether there will be a vaccine or whether there won't be. But certainly in the short term, I think for the next year, there's going to be a lot of sort of lifestyle changes.
Interesting that, question coming in on the chat here is that point that you just made about sport adapting. And, as an athlete, how much of an impact does the crowd have? That atmosphere within the stadium. Yeah. And, I think it's a great question, actually, because, of course, one of the things that I'm a massive football fan. Yeah. And the idea of watching games on the TV, without the crowd, it seems to be somewhat of an artificial experience. But as a competitor, how much of an impact do you think that will have on players and people who are competing? Yeah,
it is an interesting question. I hadn't actually really thought about that, but it is. It's the only reason that you perform better in competition than you do in training, because when there's no crowd, it's effectively like a training session, because certainly in my event, you're not really being directly affected by your competitors. So I always used to say if my best was 66, if I threw over 60 in training, then that was a great day. I invariably didn't, because you just don't have the adrenaline and the you could say that this is the Olympic Games, but without a crowd, you just have to then find your own sort of intrinsic motivation and have nothing from outside. So the atmosphere is crucial, really. And there are certain stadiums which is why football fans don't like athletics tracks around the outside of football pitches, because you do want, as an athlete, you want the crowd to be as close to you as possible, and vice versa, I think. So certain stadiums have better atmospheres than others, even if they look the same. It's quite strange, but there is a massive impact, I think. And footballers, it would effectively feel like kind of Sunday league game or a kickabout with your mates, I guess, if there's no crowd. But yeah.
I wonder actually whether it will be a bit of a leveler. In football particularly, I could see, I think back to characters that I've been fortunate enough to be in a room and heard speak, and a lot of them will tell you that, an awful lot of the motivation they draw is from the crowd. So, talents such as Gascoigne, for example, I can't imagine when he was in his heyday, going into an empty stadium and performing at that level. I just don't think, as you rightly said, that adrenaline would be pumping through his body. But of course, if he comes down, it gives those less better players an opportunity of maybe competing a little bit better against them. Maybe creating something of a false playing field, if I can put it that way. But we'll only know when we see, won't we?
And there won't be any difference between a home and away game as well, which is
yeah.
But and there are those athletes who do just come alive in the competition side of things, and they're generally your best players. So they tend to be a bit average in training, and it just doesn't excite them. But then they can just turn it on in competition. So you just might not see as much of that, but.
Well, we'll see where we go. I'll tell you, here's another good question from Patrick. As a naturally competitive person, how are you staying motivated during lockdown? Having always had an interest in different disciplines, what sports were you getting into before lockdown and look forward to returning to? So anything that you were watching or perhaps even involving yourself in a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I watch all sport. It is... I still train, not to the same degree, but certainly most days, and not being able to go to the gym. It was just up the road, actually. I think I've borrowed some weights from them, but I miss that. But actually I've adapted and just do sort of home workouts and things. But it's interesting not being able to watch sport. I do think they should just rerun the 2012 Olympics for 2 weeks. I mean, it'd be the cheapest TV ever. I don't know why they haven't.
I wonder why they haven't. Better than bloody Dad's Army every night.
And just rerun some, classic kind of moments. Really, I think so. I've never got too heavily into golf, and actually, I'm thinking maybe I should, because you can actually go and play golf now. I had one golf lesson before lockdown and loved it, and hadn't really ever played, so that might be something to get into. But it is a struggle for me. I am a bit of a doer. I enjoy being busy and doing, and I didn't ever want an office job, and I have found myself sitting at computers quite a lot, which is not my strong suit. So, but I'm doing a course just because you can't do a lot else. So, but as I mentioned to you before we came on air, I've actually got to go up to a building project on Friday, which I'm very excited about. It'll be my first time out, because there's been a plaster shortage in the building trade, but I managed to get 250 kilos off a builder friend, so I'm driving that up north. But that's excitement these days. So I think it's a good opportunity though for people to just sort of look at what they want to improve on, or what they're not doing in their life that they could be, and just and see how they want to live life moving forward. I think a lot of people will be working from home, and the companies have realised that perhaps they don't need massive offices, and I think it will be an interesting change of events. And obviously having meetings online you can do much more easily, and it's interesting. I mean, I love people, so I do struggle with not being around people so much, but it's certainly going to change, I think.
It'll be interesting to see, Goldie, I think, because I think in the initial sort of 3-4 weeks, there was that little bit of, it was a bit of a novelty. And people saying, isn't this great? I can meet people online, and I can just, go into the kitchen and make a cup of tea, and it's lovely seeing the kids. And then, of course, 9 weeks on, everybody's ready to kill the kids, probably pick the cat and the dog. And, increasingly people are saying to me, I just want to get back into the position where I can be meeting people, because ultimately we're social animals, aren't we? So as great as this is, and I can see that, if I've got a meeting in London where ordinarily I may have jumped on a train and then come back same day. I won't feel as bad now suggesting to somebody a Zoom call.
Yeah.
But equally, I don't think that there is any substitution for that personal contact. And, if you're the sort of person that you are, I can imagine that you're desperate to get back to that more than anything else, just seeing people, meeting people and getting out and about.
Yeah, I mean, in my business, I actually can't do from home really. So I do have to be out and doing viewings and making sure refurbs are going on and making sure builders are happy to work, because you can't force people to work, but most of them are doers and they have hated not doing. So yeah, it's an interesting time. I think people have probably realised that family life is much more important, and I think from a housing perspective, it'll be interesting to see how many people decide that living out of London is, why are we living in a flat without a garden and that kind of thing. So I wonder how many people will move. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, that will be interesting. I think property game in particular is going to be interesting, isn't it? Because great point about commercial space. Do people need the big offices? And then, of course, city centre living, which has been highly promoted for the past decade or more. As you rightly say, if people are stuck in flats or houses with no gardens, which is prevalent in London. There's a lot of housing don't have gardens with them, and London, of course, was the first place to really be hit with the virus. So we'll see. There may well be a mindset change in that respect. Final point from me, Goldie. It's been great to see you as always, and some great insight into, as I say, the mindset of somebody who's achieved great things, both in terms of your athletic career, but now in business as well. You mentioned earlier that you may at some point think about going into more of an executive side in the world of sport. And I know there's been a big debate in recent times about how athletics is managed in this country. What are your thoughts on the governing body at the moment? Do you think they're doing a good job? Are we in a good place?
We've just appointed a new CEO actually in British Athletics, who I've actually spoken to very recently and I've been really, really impressed with. So she was responsible for the turnaround for netball, for taking it from, primarily voluntary sport like athletics and making sure it got on TV. And then obviously they had the success at the Commonwealth Games and World Cup and things. And so hopefully she can do the same with athletics. I think there's just been, I just don't think there's been a plan for the last sort of 20 years. And people do always the cream kind of rises to the top. It's a fairly Darwinian sport in many ways. But we've kind of lacked a bit of strength and depth. And I think that's how you really start to be more successful. And there's perhaps been a bit of a lack of investment in coaching, which is the primary reason that athletes improve. So it'll be interesting to see how things go as we move forward. But I'm really excited about her appointment when I perhaps wasn't so excited about the governing body prior to that.
Yes, right.
So I think it's kind of an interesting time.
Well, on that positive note, I'll say thank you very much for joining us this morning, Goldie, and good luck for the future. Hopefully we'll be able to get you to a live event.
Well,
It'd be great to see you again. So thanks very much for this morning.
Great.
And we'll see you again very soon.